Who we are. 5 minutes of Marquette County history. There are two Fox Rivers in Wisconsin. One flows into Illinois. The other flows through Marquette County and up to Green Bay. The Fox River connects Green Bay to the Wisconsin River, which connects to the Mississippi and can take goods all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. The red line follows the Fox River. The Fox River has been important to people for thousands of years. It was a main course of transportation as well as a source of food for Paleo Indians 12,000 years ago, archaic culture, woodland, Oneota, and the historic tribes like the Ho-Chunk. The river provided wild rice, waterfowl, clams, and more food for the people here. It was tied into their stories and spiritual practices. At one time, there were over 600 Indian conical and effigy mounds around Buffalo Lake alone. You can see on the map all of the mounds and villages that used to be gathered just around Buffalo Lake, which makes up part of the Fox River. The Fox is divided into the Upper Fox and the Lower Fox. Marquette County is in the Upper Fox River, since the river flows north to Lake Winnebago, then to Green Bay. There are over 30 rivers in the U.S. and over 60 in the world that flow north. The Fox flows northeast. Here's an early map of the Upper Fox. Settler villages grew up along the Fox River, often at the same places that the first people had built their homes. Some of the villages of settlers are no longer there, like Roxo and Roslyn. This map of the approximately 200 miles of the Fox shows the elevation above sea level. You can see that the Upper Fox has a very limited slope and makes it a slow and shallow river, which is why it became hard to manage when the U.S. wanted to open it to major river traffic. The Lower Fox had many rapids and falls. In order to manage the river traffic, a series of locks were built along the river shown on this map. Montello and the Grand River locks were in Marquette County. Dredges worked the river 7 days a week, every day of the year that the river was open. Here is a dredge by the Montello Dam about 1890. The dredge silt was piled along the shore, changing the banks and the shape of the river, in this case Buffalo Lake. This Dr. E.A. Bass photo from about 1880 is of what we now call the Dredge Bank Road in Montello. And yet another dredge, this one piling up the silt that eventually became the small island off of the Dredge Bank Road that was once called Wheaton's Island for the lock tender who worked at the lock at the time. Next to the dredge is a Durham boat or barge. These flat-bottomed boats hauled everything from lumber to wood for the steamboats to hams, nails, and other goods. A photo from about 1900 of the Montello Lock Chamber with the Fox River Dam below it. The White House sits about where Rendezvous is today. The lock was built in 1868 and closed in 1951. The first lock tender in Montello was John Lewis, shown here in his Civil War uniform. He also owned a mill on the Fox and for a while a hotel. The Marquette County Historical Society has his early records of boats going through the locks and what they were carrying. The lock tenders worked for the U.S. government. Next to Lewis is Blaine Slevin, who was the lock tender after Lewis. He was also the village policeman, a clammer, had a launch he rented out for excursions, and owned a rooming house. Next to him is Jack Wheaton, who began as lock tender in Montello in 1925 and worked there until the locks closed in 1951. The Grand River locks were built in 1879. M.D. Leonard was the first lock tender, but soon after opening, Jerry Parkinson took over from Leonard and served almost 33 years. He's shown here in the boat. Here is Jerry Parkinson, his wife Georgiana, and his son Harvey. His son Harvey took over from Jerry and served almost 30 years. He was followed by Lawrence Heller, who worked there until the locks closed in 1951. Here is the Grand River locks about 1910, looking west towards the Fox River. Of course, before there were locks, there was the problem of crossing the river. At first, there were ferries at various points along the river, all licensed by the county. Then bridges started to be built. They were usually float bridges at first that could be pulled open to let boats pass through. This one was at Packwaukee. The same bridge grew a little more sophisticated, as did the road passing over the river. This bridge operated at the juncture of County Road O and F. This is during a flood in 1905. Soon after, a turn bridge was built there on big stone cylinders. That bridge used a turn key with a large wooden handle to open it. That key is at the Marquette County Historical Society. Charles Suderman, who lived at that corner, would come to the bridge when the steamboat blew the horn or when a boater would come to the house and find him, and he would come open the bridge that turned on the large stone-built cylinder. You can still see the balustrades for the bridge there. It's on the John Muir Nature and History route and is a popular place to put in kayaks and canoes. Here are Charles and his wife Eliza. By 1911, bridges were metal. This railroad bridge was built in 1911 and still stands over the river in Packwaukee. A workman stayed in the building on top of the bridge to open it for big ships that could not fit under the bridge. The house is gone on the bridge. All of Marquette County benefited from the Fox River and still benefits today. Merritt's Landing, originally known as Brown's Landing and today known as Endeavor, had a wharf and was a regular stopping place for steamboats, barges, and pleasure boats. Besides having a landing, the residents of Endeavor also had an active curling club and played their games on the frozen Fox River. Packwaukee had 2 wharves. This is one of them. Farmers brought goods to ship, merchants picked up supplies, and passengers traveled to various points along the river from Packwaukee. The boats made stops at wharves and locks, but also would pull up at the bank for folks to pick up or drop off shipments. It was common for people, especially young boys, to haul wood down to the riverbank to sell to the steamboats as they passed through. The Ellen Hardy was a frequent visitor to Montello and Packwaukee. Montello had numerous businesses that shipped goods on the Fox River, including the Granite Company, which shipped granite before the railroads came in. But there were also pleasure trips. This pleasure excursion, we believe, was for Civil War veterans and took place on the Montello, a busy steamboat during its time. Other commerce also flourished because of the Fox River. This is the Taggarts and Knopf Boat Company, and there was also the Grolke strip boats on the shores of the river in Montello, whose boats were used on Buffalo Lake as well as Apocauwa by hunters from as far away as Chicago. Guido Gorski's uncle was also an early boat builder in Montello. Excursions like this one on a 4th of July were a common occurrence between Montello and Packwaukee, and numerous craft ran passenger transportation on the river. The H.A. Freytag launch ran regularly for pleasure excursions. That's H.A. in the black shirt. The newspapers of the day announced which steamboats would be passing through, and it was a big day when the Fox River opened up after winter. The Fox was also a frequent visitor along the Fox River. Pleasure was as important as commerce, and resorts grew up all along the Fox River as early as the 1860s and 70s, and still thrive today. Recreational craft were a common sight. Many of the larger recreational boats came up the Fox River from Oshkosh. The locks areas were kept as parks, and people often brought tents and camped there. Here are some visitors at the Grand River Locks area enjoying a vacation. After the railroad came to Marquette County, river traffic slowly died. Then the dredging stopped and the locks closed. The Y Hurry was the last larger boat through the Grand River Locks before they were closed in 1951. But the Fox River is still important to Marquette County. Just as in the past, pleasure boats still travel the river and hunting and fishing still flourishes, but the working days of the river are gone for good.